right, you guys, as you can see by the thumbnail, this is episode 99 of Inner Demons. And without further ado, I'm going to jump straight back into this. So, episode 98, I believe I left off right after they moved me to 6A. I had been up, it was a long day. That night that I got up to 6A, I went to work on the cell, cleaned it up a little bit, tried to make it at least decent enough to crash out that night. Some of those cells can get pretty funky. But anyways, I had all my property and everything kind of spread out, and I did what I did that night, and then I called it a night and crashed out. I was tired. It was a long day. Aside from sitting in the chow hall, during the entire time when they were doing that shakedown in Siberia, it was just an exhausting day. Just dealing with the fact that just dealing with everything that I had to deal with as far as getting moved, my property. There was a lot of issues with my property. There was legal work, a lot of legal work. They were trying to lock up on my property, and just just everything about getting moved and going to a new environment. It was exhausting. So, the following morning, I get up, and this is when I start to see who's up there in 6A. So the following morning, I want to say I crashed out probably around 2 o'clock. And in that county jail, breakfast is like at 3:30. So I probably got like an hour and a half of sleep. And they came through with breakfast. And then after that, I popped up at around 5:30, 6 o'clock. That internal clock, from doing years of time, that internal clock, you're used to getting up early. It doesn't matter how much sleep you get. Even to this day, I can get an hour of sleep, but I'll pop up at 6 o'clock in the morning. I'm up early, and that's because that internal clock has been set years ago, and I can't shake it. There's been times where I've wanted to sleep in, but I just can't do it. Anyway, so at 6 o'clock in the morning, I'm up. I got like an hour, 2 hours of sleep. I'm still tired, but I go back to work on the cell. I'm, running back and forth to the window to see who's out there in 6A. I want to see who's around me. And, they got pill call going on. And I want to say we didn't come out in 6A until around 10 o'clock in the morning. That's when program opened up. And this dorm right here, it's similar to 5C. It's set up the same way. If I can, I'll throw a couple of pictures in there. You guys should be looking at pictures right now of the layout, how these dorms are set up. So, I'm cleaning my cell. I'm going back and forth to the window to see who's out there. They got pill call going on. And there's a couple cats that I know from, I've been in that jail for a long time. From, the years that I was active down there in Second East, there's a couple cats that were up there that I knew from Second East, from Siberia, from some of the max tiers. But everybody that I knew, all my co-defendants and everybody that was down there with me in Siberia, and a lot of the guys that got rolled up from that big brawl we got into. So even though I was getting situated in 6A, my plan was to eventually try to make my way down there to 5A where everybody else was at. And the homies had even reached out to me on a couple of different occasions, like, hey, bro, it's cool down here. We got a cool routine, and the COs that are working down here are cool. You need to try to make your way down here. But the thing is that the administration was mad at me. And I think they were butthurt based on the fact that they gave me a trustee job and it went all the way to the top. So like I told you guys, when I was down there in Siberia, originally they didn't even want me to be a trustee. This was something that was taken to the top by certain COs that were working in Third West that basically went to bat for me. These guys wanted to give me a chance to work out there as a trustee. And I want to say the captain, against his better judgment, allowed it to happen. But there was some pushback. They weren't too crazy about the idea because there was a lot involved. Like I told you guys, not to get off track, but like I told you guys, me being a trustee out there was a heightened level of concern based on the fact that in Third West, it's one of the main thoroughfares right there. There's a lot of traffic from Third East. You got guys coming from the second deck that come up there for attorney visits or interviews or things like that. So there's a lot of traffic. And even though these guys knew that, they still allowed me to work out there. I told you guys that when I was in Siberia, that they didn't even want me to be a trustee. The administration, I want to say it was the captain The captain allowed it, but there was some pushback. And it wasn't like he was like, yeah, you know what, let Boxer out. It's all good. He can be a trustee and there's nothing to worry about. They were tripping. There was a lot of different contingencies that they set in place. And these COs that went to bat for me, they even gave me they gave me the speech. You know, before they allowed me to come out and start working, they took me to the chow hall, me and the other trustee, and they're like, you know what, we like you guys, we like the way that you guys work, but you know, here's the thing. You guys got to give us your word that if you're out there working and some other Northerners come through or some other, you know, general population inmates come through, that you're not going to go out of your way to get into a confrontation. If they come through, you know, their thing was, you guys need to go into the break room. Just go into the break room and post up. And you know, my intentions were good. I wasn't trying to get nobody caught up, but I gave him a tongue-in-cheek answer. I was like, you know what? If that happens, I'll make my way into the break room and I'll try to avoid it. When in reality, at first, I was kind of inviting something to happen, but that was only because of how some of these guys would walk by and some of them would mean mug and they try to act like they wanted to be that guy. So when that opportunity presented itself and I was out there and those same individuals came through by themselves, I would make my way over there to where they were at to see if they were going to try to do something. And not one time did anybody try to do anything. And again, you know, I really wasn't trying to engage with other Northerners. I didn't have an issue with them. I didn't have a bad taste in my mouth for the homies at that time. It was between me and some other people that were dealing with my situation. That's where the animosity was directed. So it wasn't like I was mad at the homies and I was looking for an opportunity to take flight on somebody. It wasn't nothing like that. I was directing some negative energy back at some negative energy. Anyways, my point in telling you guys all this is my intentions were to try to get down there to 5A, but they made a big issue out of this contraband that they found. Even though I never admitted that that contraband was mine, and even though they had a lot of guys that were down there in Siberia that were saying that was Boxer's contraband, they were dead set on believing that it was mine or that I had something to do with it, which I did, but I never admitted it. But they were upset about it. And when they put me in 6A, it was to keep me separated from everybody else. They put me in 6A as a form of punishment. At least the sergeant that moved me that night did. You know, there was a couple of teams that were cool, and there were a couple of teams that were adamantly against me. What I mean by teams is you had different sets of officers that worked different times: A team, B team, C team, D team. And each one of these teams had a sergeant and a lieutenant. But the sergeant that moved me that night, he was in cahoots with another lieutenant. I think his name was Fields. And he had been campaigning for me to get moved out of Siberia or to be taken out of that trustee position from day one. As soon as he found out, and as soon as there were other COs that, you know, were crying about it, that were crying to him, complaining, they, you know, made a push to try to get me removed from that trustee position. But at that time, I had the backing from the captain and these other COs that made it happen. But anyways, eventually I had to accept the fact that I was going to be stuck in 6A, which was cool. So I gave up on trying to get down there to 5A, and I let the homies know they're not going to let me come down there. They're basically punishing me for, you know, everything that happened down there in Siberia. But this was jail, and either way, I was going to be okay. And I understand, you know, how things work. You know, you're not always going to be comfortable. You have to make the best out of certain environments that you get put in. And that's basically what I did. So anyways, later on that morning, by the time I get through splashing around in my cell, I get my workout in, I finish cleaning the cell. At some point, right before we get to come out to program, this CO, one of the only regulars that worked in that unit. And that's the other thing that was messed up about that unit. The thing I didn't like about 6A is that there weren't no regular COs. And when you don't have a regular CO in your unit, it's hard to get, you know, into a program. It's hard to get into a routine, especially if you got contraband and you're worried about them hitting your cell or things like that, because you got somebody new coming in every night and you don't know what they're going to do. You don't know what their program is, what kind of policies they implement. it kind of throws you off a little bit. But that's the one thing that I didn't like about 6A is that they were always putting in overtimers. There was always somebody new coming in. So anyways, he pops my door open and he tells me, he's like, hey man, I'm glad you're up here. You know, he's like, I wish there were more guys like you on my tier. You know how to do time. You're quiet. You've been around. He's like, hey, I heard what happened in Siberia. He's like, man, that's crazy. He's like, everybody's talking about it. They made a big issue out of this contraband thing. I'm telling you guys, when they went up in that ceiling and they pulled out all that contraband, they hit the mother load. They pulled out DVD players to cell phones to chargers to PlayStation portables, condiments, street food, produce, onions, tomatoes, tortillas, and all kinds of other contraband. There was a lot of contraband, and they made a big issue out of it because they knew that there were COs down there that had been compromised. Somebody was bringing this stuff in, and they wanted to know who it was. I wasn't gonna tell them shit. I wasn't gonna burn nobody that had looked out for me. I never admitted that that contraband was mine, but like I said, they were dead set on believing that I either had something to do with it or that it was mine. I think they even did an IA investigation on it. I don't know, but they were trying to find out. There were a lot of people down there in Siberia in other tanks that were giving up information, but they didn't really have the details and they didn't know who was involved. All they were doing was speculating. And that's because it wasn't like I was sharing that information with anybody. These guys were just looking through the windows. That's how they were getting their information. But anyways, so this CEO, he's telling me, he's like, man, he's like, you were living comfortable down there, man. All the stuff that they said that you guys had down there, it was like, that's crazy, man. Even though this CEO was cool, I didn't even fall into that trap of getting into a conversation with him about it. I was like, I don't know what they found, man, but I just told him, everything that happened down there in Siberia, I either think that I had something to do with it or I was somehow involved, but it's all good. Being down there in Siberia with all that freedom, it kind of distracted me. It took away from me writing. And by that time in the game, I was starting to make preparations for sentencing. But this CO, he basically told me, he's like, look, this unit, it's a cool unit. There's a couple JCats up here, but for the most part, it's quiet up here. So anyways, this CO, he just told me, he's like, look, man, you know how I do it. This unit, it's a cool unit. You got some JCats, you got a couple JCats, but for the most part, it's quiet. It's quiet in here. Every now and then we'll have an incident. But if you need anything, just get at me. Just let me know. So anyways, I want to say that I would end up staying in 6A probably for about a good 3 or 4 months, 3 or 4 solid months. And what I said to the CEO about, me not investing any time in my book and being distracted was true. When I was down there in Siberia, I don't think I wrote one chapter or one page on my book. It was stuck in my legal work. I had it buried. I never even thought about it because I was down there distracted. I was either kicking it with the fellas down there. We were working out, we were drinking, watching TV, playing pinochle. I was always doing something down there. It's an open dorm environment, so it's kind of hard to sit down and focus the way that I needed to finish writing my book. The only way I was able to do that was being in a cell by myself where I was able to just focus on what I was trying to do. That's the one thing that was good about 6A is that I had a lot of idle time on my hands. So pull my book out and I started banging out chapters. I started getting back into it. I want to say the last time I invested any time in writing in it was probably when I was in Little Max, and that was like a year prior. But anyway, 6A ended up being a cool spot. There were a couple of cats, like I said, that I had known from other parts of the jail that I had been with, previously that I kicked it with. I kept my circle small up there. I want to say there was probably around 5 individuals that I conversed with up there. Other than that, there were a lot of people I never even spoke to them because at that time I was concentrating on my case. I was concentrating on my book and just everything else that was going on. So in 6A, for the most part, we got a lot of freedom up there. We came out in the morning and we stayed out all the way up until like 3 o'clock. And then at 3 o'clock, I think we went in for like an hour. They did count, they did shift change, and then after dinner, we come back out until around 11 o'clock. So we were out for a good part of the day. And when these guys will be out there playing pinochle or out there watching a movie or just out there on the tier playing grab ass, I would be in the cell sitting there at my desk, just, writing chapters. And that's the only reason why I was able to finish my book. If I wouldn't have moved to 6A, I probably would have never finished the book. The environments that I was housed in really did dictate whether or not I invested any time in that book, because there's either just too much going on or it's just not the right type of environment. But anyways, what I'm probably going to do is I'm probably going to end up doing some follow-up episodes, because there's a lot of stuff that I missed. There's a lot of the court stuff that I just kind of brushed over real quick that, I didn't talk about. And I wanted to give you guys a lot of that in Inner Demons. But what I will say in this episode is that, the Operation Valley Star, that case came up and it had started to heat up. I remember when everybody first got busted in that case. Everybody got swept up and indicted in that case. Bubba, Baki, Gabe Caracheo, Nicoya, Wino, Juan Gallegos. So Operation Valley Star was like the second part of Operation Black Widow. It was the second federal indictment, and a lot of these guys were from Salinas that it got caught up in Valley Star. So when that case started heating up, I knew everybody that was involved in that case. I was keeping tabs on them. Those were my boys. So I remember when Operation Valley Star, when it broke. By then, when I'm in 6A, this is around 2010 or 2011. Operation Valley Star had broke a couple of years prior to that. So the case started to heat up. A lot of these guys started to go to trial. And I remember being propositioned about that case. I mean, I remember when that case was mentioned about the possibility of me being involved in it, and I was adamant about not wanting to have nothing to do with it. I was close with these guys. Baki, Bubba, Wino, Gabe Caracheo, Nicoya from Frisco. There were a lot of other cats that were involved in that case. I can't remember them off the top of my head right now, that I was real close with at one time, and I wasn't gonna have nothing to do with that case. I remember when it was first mentioned, I was thinking that it was gonna become a problem, and I was gonna be at a big impasse as far as what I was gonna do, because I didn't want nothing to do with it. I didn't want nothing to do with it. They kind of pressed me on it. They were insisting on it in the beginning, but I want to say, because they seen how adamant I was about not wanting to be involved in it, they backed off. So there was another NF member, Sammy Ramirez, that by then Sammy had already laid down. So Sammy had a lot of dealings with the Salinas Regiment when he was out there functioning on the streets, running his regiment in San Jose. And that's basically where they turned to. The next option was Sammy Ramirez. So that case became part of his plea agreement. He had to go testify in Operation Valley Star. And I remember when he went, they transported him from the Santa Clara County Jail to Sacramento. I want to say it was Sacramento, where they were being held at. And obviously, after, he made his run over there and he did what he did, when he came back to the Santa Clara County Jail. At that time, we were still in Siberia. But I had asked him, I'm like, bro, what happened? Who did you see? Who was in the courtroom? I don't know if those cases got separated. I don't know if Wino and Bubba went to trial separately or if they played out. But I remember him mentioning seeing Baki and Powder in the courtroom when he went to testify. And I asked him, like, so when you walked in the courtroom, what happened? And he told me that Baki was sitting there. These guys, they probably told these guys, like they do in other trials, not to mean mug somebody when they come in and testify against you and all that. So they try not to make eye contact with you. But he said when he walked in, Baki was just on him. Baki just looked at him. I got a lot of history with Baki. I know him well. We've done a lot of things together. We've done a lot of dirt together. He was like family at one time. But, when he told me that when he was up there testifying, he told me that his lip was quivering, that he was just mugging him. That's something that he remembered. When he said that, though, me knowing Baki, he does that when he gets mad, when he gets, upset about something. I remember a couple of times where he got into a couple of confrontations with somebody, and I remember seeing that. So as soon as he told me, I could picture it happening. But, he went in there and he did what he did. And I mean, that was pretty much it. I know that Bubba, Wino, all those guys, Baki, that were involved in that case, even though I wasn't the one that went and did what Sammy did, and I'm sure on some level, maybe they were advised of this, maybe they weren't. I don't know. But what I'm trying to say is, in the big scheme of things, I know it doesn't matter either way, the situation. I'm still gonna be looked at the way that they're supposed to look at me because of the choices I made. I'm sure on a personal level, they were like, yeah, that's my guy. I'm glad, he didn't stoop that low and come do the deed that Sammy did. But it really doesn't change nothing else. The other thing I wanted to convey to you guys is this. Whether it was 5C, Siberia, Little Max, North Max, Second East, the OB cells, 6A, wherever I was at, because of who I used to be, people used to treat me different. And what I mean by that is this. When I fell into bad standings, I understood the situation that I was in. I wasn't under any false pretenses thinking that, you know what, I'm still special, or I'm still going to get the kind of attention that I used to get when I was active. All that changed, and I understood that. But what I used to trip on is that other people still used to give me that same kind of attention, or they still used to treat me with that same level of respect, if that makes sense to you guys. Here I was in 6A or in Siberia, and these guys would treat me different. I was still, in some ways, I was still the NF member B, the big homie. And it's crazy when I think about it, but that's how they used to treat me. They used to treat me with a high level of respect. And again, it wasn't because I was carrying myself like that, or because I was still trying to push a line. I wasn't. I was at that point, I was understanding of the situation that I was in. But I could clearly tell that, some of these guys would treat me different just based off my name and my history. I give you guys an example. When I got up to 6A, there was an Africano named Glenn Gordon from San Francisco. And, this guy, nobody liked him because he was one of those kind of guys that would write 602 after 602. They don't call it that in the Santa Clara County Jail. I think they call them grievances or whatever. But he was one of those kind of guys that complained about everything, and he was always getting into conflicts, and people would call him petty. But him being from Frisco, me being from San Francisco, we had somewhat of a connection just based on that alone. And to be honest with you guys, I kind of felt bad for the dude. I kind of felt sorry for him. Nobody else liked him, and he didn't have nothing coming. The COs didn't like him because he was always writing them up, and he was always complaining about something. I'm not saying we were best friends, but I used to have conversations with him. Every now and then, he liked to play chess. I would come out and I'd shoot a couple of games of chess with him. And if he needed something, some canteen or something like that, some coffee, I would hook him up. I'm on the phone, and there's a Baisa. He's an older dude. He's a real quiet guy. All that guy did was come out, watch his novellas, and for the rest of the day, he'd just be minding his own business. He was a real quiet guy. But I guess these two got into it over the TV. They were arguing over what they wanted to watch. One of them wanted to watch novellas, the other one wanted to watch something else. And here I am talking on the phone. I'm talking on the phone, and I didn't even know they were fighting. They were arguing about the TV until they walked over to where I was at on the phone, and both of them, like kids, until Glenn came over and said, hey, Beeves, like, man, we want to watch some sports. We've been letting this dude watch novellas all morning, and, there's a game on, and there's a couple of us that want to watch sports. He's like, man, this guy, that's all he wants to watch. And he's the only one watching them, but there's more of us that want to watch sports. And I remember sitting there on the phone and thinking to myself, why are these dudes getting at me about the TV? And it was almost like there were two little kids that had a problem in school with each other and didn't know how to deal with it. And they were coming to to a grown up for some kind of resolution. And it just tripped me out. I was sitting there thinking to myself, why are they getting at me about this? I remember telling them something like, Glenn, there's like 15 minutes left on that novella. The game, it just started. Let them watch it and then turn the channel, man. And they were both happy with that. They both turned around and walked away. And I remember just tripping on that though. Like, these are some grown ass men. They came crying to me about what they wanted to watch, and they were bickering over the TV. But the bigger thing was that, I realized that I still had a lot of influence with a lot of them on some level because of who I used to be. And again, let me make it very clear. That's not how I was carrying myself. I wasn't carrying myself like a lot of NF members or a lot of Mexican Mafia members that have been in leadership positions, and they're riding that high, and they're used to being treated a certain way, being catered to. They're used to being, having their ego stroked and being called the big homie, and they're just used to being, given that preferential treatment. And then when, they end up getting their wings clipped or they fall in bad standings, all that goes away. And a lot of them have a hard time dealing with that. They've always been used to having their ego stroked. They've always been used to, being called the big homie and treated with a certain level of respect. But now they're just a regular individual like anybody else. And a lot of them can't accept that. I understood my situation. And anybody that was there in that county jail, I'm sure they would tell you that's not how B was carrying himself. He wasn't carrying himself like he was still calling shots. He wasn't still trying to push a line or act like he was the big homie. I wasn't doing that. But that's the kind of attention that I would get. And it wasn't only from the inmates, from the COs that worked in that county jail. And for those of you that have never been in a leadership position, I mean, I'm sure you should still be able to relate. It's just like, I'm sure there's some of you that, had a lot of influence at one point, or, had some kind of status that you can relate to what I'm saying. It comes with the territory. And a lot of the COs, they'll treat inmates based on who they are, their status, and a lot of them are infatuated with that shit. They find out that you're, an NF member or Mexican Mafia member, as they find out who you used to be, who you were affiliated with, what your status was. If, they hear that you were a leader, or you were part of leadership, they're going to treat you a different way. And I'm telling you that from experience. All the years that I spent in prison, and I would go through San Quentin or Pelican Bay or Corcoran. A lot of these COs, when you pull up to a new housing unit, or you hit their tier or their block or their unit, they're gonna want to know who you are, a little bit about your past history. And as soon as they find out you're a NF member or a Mexican Mafia member, they're going to treat you a different way than the way that they would treat just a norteño or a sureño or just a regular individual. Trust me, they treat you different. And it doesn't really change when you end up in bad standings. Well, that might depend on the individual, because if you carry yourself like a jackass and you're not really carrying yourself like somebody who used to be somebody, then they're going to treat you accordingly. But anyways, it's just something that I was conscious of, especially in that situation where these two grown-ass men came up and were bickering over the TV. Hopefully that makes sense to you guys. So getting back to my book, while I was there in 6A, I was actually able to finish it there. I want to say when I moved up there, I probably had about 30 chapters in. The book is, I think it's around 50 something chapters. The other 20 something chapters I finished right there in 6A. And, as soon as I was done with the manuscript, I had it sent out, I had it typed up, and that's how I was able to get the book out. For those of you that don't know, for those of you that have the book or have an interest in eventually getting the book, or for those of you that don't even care, I wrote that book directly from my hand. I didn't have a ghostwriter. I didn't have somebody else helping me write it. Only help that I had with that book was with a dictionary and a thesaurus. Otherwise, I sat there and wrote that book word for word myself. And when it was printed, I had the option to get the book edited. But when they looked at the book, they were like, you know what? This doesn't need to be edited. You did that yourself. And it's better leaving it the way that it is. It's gritty, it's raw, and if we edit this book, it's going to take away a lot of the character. You use a lot of street slang and a lot of metaphors, so just leave it the way that it is. So when you read the book, or those of you that have read it, that came directly from me. You know, with all due respect to Renee Enriquez, boxer, Chris Blatchford wrote his book. I think they kind of did it together, but Chris Blatchford, you know, he put it in his context, which I think it kind of takes away from, not to sound critical, because I don't like to criticize other people's books, but I just think it takes away a little bit of the character that, you know, would have come from Renee had he written it himself. It's still a good book. It's one of the best books I've ever read, but I would have rather have read it, you know, coming directly from Renee himself, the same way I wrote my book. So before I close this up, I'm going to get into one more incident that happened at 6A before I get into this war story. And I just want to tell you guys about this incident because, you know, for one, I had never heard about this stuff at that point, and for two, it was crazy when it happened. But what I'm talking about is, so there was a cat that I used to talk to up there in 6A. He had been with me in Second East when we were still active, and solid dude. To this day, I'm still in touch with him. He's out, he's working, he's in a better place. You know who you are. I send mines to you, boy. So what they used to do in 6A is they'd let the bottom tier come out and they'd run their program. And then after we'd get our program, they'd let the top tier out and program because there were too many inmates in that unit to let everybody come out at the same time. So that was their way of kind of managing the unit. So that night after, you know, we got our program, the top tier came out, and you know, this homie that was down there in Second East with me every night, he would come to my door, and pretty much that's where he would spend his entire program time, right there at my door. He'd go take a shower, then he'd come over there and he'd kick it. Well, I remember on one night he came over to my door and he's like, "Hey B," he's like, "You smoke Yeska, right?" And I'm like, "Hell yeah." And then he's like, and then he tells me, he goes, "Hey, you ever heard of spice?" And then when he said spice, I'm like, "Spice? What are you talking about? Spice? Like cooking spice?" And he's like, "Spice, bro." He's like, it's like Yeska, but it's a little bit stronger. It's something that you know, it just came out at that point, or it was kind of still new. I never heard about it. I was like, "Nah, man. I've never heard about it, never smoked it, don't know what it is. Why, what's up?" And he's like, "I got a Lenyo." He's like, "We're gonna blaze right now." So he goes, "Let me go get it, this cat." He goes, "I think he got some matches." He's like, "I'm gonna go see if he'll give me a match, and I'm gonna come back and we'll blaze up." So I'm like, "All right, cool." So like I said, I had never heard of this stuff before, didn't know nothing about it, had never tried it. I honestly thought these fools were smoking cooking spice, that it was along the lines of like some banana peel type shit. So he comes back and he's like, "Hey, this cat let me use his lighter." He goes, "Here, I'm gonna slide it under the door, light it up, bro. Light it up and then pass it back." So he slides it under the door. I get it, twist it up, kind of break it down a little bit. Then I light it. I take a couple hits on it and I pass it back. And I didn't really feel nothing. It kind of tasted like, it tasted like spice, like cooking spice. So, you know, he gets it, he takes a couple of hits, he passes it back, and we end up smoking the whole thing. It crept up on me. While we were smoking it, I didn't feel shit. You know, I tasted it and that's about it. But I didn't feel nothing. But it was probably around, I want to say it was delayed reaction, man, straight up, because probably around 3 minutes after we stopped, because I want to say like 3 minutes after, you know, we were done, that shit crept up on me to the point to where I was like super paranoid. I turned my light off and I'm like, "Bro, get away from my door. Get up out of here, man." Seriously, I was, you know, weed makes me paranoid. That's why I don't smoke it today. You know, I used to be a little pothead. I loved weed, but even to this day, right now, if I smoke a joint, it gets me so paranoid that I start thinking too much. So that's why I really don't indulge. Every now and again, I might spark something up. I'll take a hit, but I'll put it out. So whatever spice is, it freaked me out because, you know, I get paranoid when I smoke weed, but this made me 5 times more paranoid than weed. I don't know what it. I remember later on reading something about it, and they were saying that, you know, spice was actually dangerous. It was killing people. I don't know how true it is, but you know, that's something that happened in 6A. For those of you that might have tried it, I'm sure you guys know what I'm talking about. but that's something that I experienced right there in the Santa Clara County Jail. And after that, if anybody ever approached me with a lanyard of some spice, want to smoke that shit, I try to get as far away from them as fast as I could. So this is probably a good place to end this episode. Like I told you guys earlier, I'm probably going to do some follow-up episodes where I go back and talk about things that I missed throughout different episodes, because there's some things that I missed that I didn't really talk about that I should have elaborated on, or that I should have went into more in depth that I didn't. So I'm going to go back and talk about those things, because I'm at a point right now where I'm almost out of the county jail. And before I get, beyond that point where I hit the streets and I tell you guys about everything that happened on the streets, I want to make sure you guys have a full understanding of everything that happened in the jail, or some of the things that I might have missed earlier on, in some of the earlier episodes of Inner Demons. Anyways, with that being said, if you guys like this episode, give it a thumbs up. If you didn't like this episode, give it a thumbs down. But either way, drop a comment and let me know what you think. As always, I want to extend my appreciation to everybody that tapped in, everybody that continues to support the channel, and those of you who continue to push that positivity. On that note, you guys enjoy your week. Be safe out there. This is your boy B, and I'm out.